Good evening and welcome to Robin Craig Live. I'm Robin Craig, your host for the next 60 minutes, and I am delighted you're here because I've got a really great guest, and we're going to be talking about bereavement healing. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Peggy Sweeney. Another thing that I want to do is announce our winner of Benitos from last week. Everybody knows these are like the greatest chips. I'm giving away another case of these tonight, and they are so good. They are made from beans rather than corn or potatoes. They are gluten-free, wheat-free, high fiber. They've got 4 grams of complete protein. I mean, they're delicious in addition to having all of these health benefits, and they're getting a lot of recognition in different categories of people who monitor foods for healthy eating. So last week's winner of 1 case of Benitos, these are like the big gigantic bags. They say that there are 9 servings. Everybody says that you eat at least half a bag. I know I'm guilty of that. But last week's winner was Doug Morris. Doug, congratulations. You were just talking about hearing a Benitos commercial. Well, honey, you're winning the Benitos. I've already placed the order, so you will be looking for a case of these very soon. Now, I'm going to give away another case tonight, and you just need to go to my website, robincraigdirect.com, and I'm going to take the 10th email that just says Benitos. If you want to say something additional, that's fine, and just remember to do that at the end of the show. Now, I've got a couple of really great shows coming up over the next 2 weeks. And in case we run out of time at the end, which I'm famous for, I want to share that with you. Next week, my guest is Kathleen Reel. She is a widow and the author of Moving Forward on Your Own. It's a financial guidebook for widows, and she's a widow, and she is a certified financial planner, and she's got her PhD, so she knows her stuff. And money is a big issue for, it seems like, almost everybody, so make sure you watch next Tuesday to hear what Kathleen Reel has to say. And then I'm really excited to announce that the following week, April the 10th, my guest is going to be Amy Yazbek, John Ritter's widow, and I'm sure you all know her. She's a wonderful actress, and we're going to talk about what John died from. We'll talk about the Ritter Foundation, and I'll also be speaking to a doctor about this medical condition because it's something that we all really need to know about. So make sure you tune in next week for Kathleen Reel and the following week for Amy Yazbek, John Ritter's widow, and Dr. Diana Milowitz, who has been studying the genetics of this. I mean, she's so sharp, I just can't imagine figuring out genes that let you know whether you're predisposed to the illness, thoracic aortic dissection, that John Ritter died from. So stick around for that. Now, I'm going to tell you about Peggy in a minute, but first, it's time for the Critter Update. Spring is here. There's so much activity in my yard, it's insane. Fortunately, I'm whispering, nothing in the attic, and I sure hope it stays that way. It's been blissful not hearing a herd of elephants in my attic. But what I did notice are the lizards are out, and if you're my Facebook friend, you saw me post a photo of a really green lizard. I thought that guy did not have to change clothes for St. Patrick's Day. He was green from head to tail, and it's really fun to see them because they get that weird thing in their throat that comes out and goes back. You know what I'm talking about? It's such a weird thing. I've never researched lizards, so I don't know what that is, but I just sit there and look at them going, what's that thing that keeps coming out? Anyway, that's it for the Critter Update, which I'm happy about. I hope that I don't have any more excitement. Well, I can't say that. I'm always about excitement, but in reference to the possums and raccoons you guys have heard me talk so much about. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about Peggy Sweeney. She is a bereaved parent. She is a bereavement educator, member of a volunteer fire department. She was an EMT, and she is a retired mortician. Isn't that just wild? Let's get this gal on the phone. Hello, Peggy. You are on Robin Craig Live. How are you?
Well, I am doing just great, and hello to everybody out in radio TV land.
Yes, everybody has been so excited about your presence. As I mentioned, I've been all over Facebook letting people know that that you would be here with us tonight. So you just had such an amazing career, and if you've been watching the chat room, It's amazing to see how people are doing things now to give back which stem from their personal loss. And you're doing the same thing as a bereavement educator, which I admire so much.
Yes, and I think that's really important to find. It's part of growing through your grief when you decide that you need to do something to give back to those that helped you along the way, or to start to help people that are just newly bereaved.
Yes, absolutely. I have to stop for a moment to look at the chat room. Julia, she lives in Kansas and she's been traveling on spring break with her daughter in Florida. And she said that they only saw 3 lizards in Florida. And she is informing me that that thing that comes in and out is only on the males. And it's so that they look pretty to the ladies. Who would have thought? I tell you, this show is educational more ways than one. And of course, she is saying that the Portuguese man of war were all over the place. I know. I think I'd rather have the lizards than the Portuguese man of war, but that's really kind of cute and funny. I love hearing that. And that's what's so great about this show, because it's casual and we can say and do whatever we want. And I really, really love that. So, Peggy, I'm going to put up your website right now. But you tell everybody a little bit about the Sweeney Foundation, your nonprofit, the Sweeney Alliance.
The Sweeney Alliance, yes, I started after I got out of mortuary school in 1990, and I wanted to do bereavement education. I'm not a counselor, I'm a bereavement educator. And what I did was start my own company. It's called the Sweeney Alliance, and it's a nonprofit organization. And under that umbrella, I offer different types of programs. I have the HUGS program, which is how to understand grief seminars, and that's just a general grief information program. I have CHAT, which is Children Healing After Trauma, and I did a lot of work with kids in junior high and high school that had suffered, the death of someone loved. I did, when a student or a teacher died, they bring me in and I do a program for all the kids and the staff at school. One of my latest endeavors that I have wanted to do for many years is I started a newsletter called Journeys Through Grief. And it just started out as being, every other month, and I did different types of articles. I'd get authors to come in, people, just regular people, everyday people, just like you and I, and they would write articles on a specific topic. Well, now I'm getting ready to launch my 4th newsletter. I have one for bereaved parents. I have one for emergency responders and law enforcement. And June 1st, I will launch one for bereaved spouses or partners. So this is me in a nutshell.
Well, I'm really proud of you for doing that, and you're so articulate, and you have such great energy, and I know that you're helping a lot of people, including the viewers of Rob and Craig Live tonight. Now, as we were talking about, sometimes when we go through traumatic experiences, it helps us to focus and figure out what we want to do in the future. And you had an ectopic pregnancy. You lost a child. And is that where all of your good work stems?
It's part of it. I think for me personally, I've had a lot of experiences with death. My dad died at the age of 61, and I was a young mother. We had just adopted a baby from Korea months before, and he was my best friend. He was not just my dad, he was my best friend, and he died suddenly. So, and I had other family members that had died, like grandparents, but when my dad died, that really, I guess, was the start of my journey to where I am today, because both of my parents have died, of course, grandparents. My brother-in-law died as a result of suicide 5 years ago, and then I had this ectopic pregnancy. And that was another major turning point in my life, because I remember when I woke up from the anesthesia and they explained to me what had happened, that I had had this ectopic pregnancy and they had to remove, part of my fallopian tube, and therefore, I wasn't going to have a baby. I wasn't pregnant. I went into, just a spiral down. And
Yes.
the nurse was so wonderful in the recovery room because she and I both cried, and she explained to me what was happening. And of course, I thought there was something wrong with me. What had I done wrong? Was I not living a good life? That type of thing. And she said no, that this was a medical condition. It was nothing that I did. Well, what was so sad is when I came home, no one acknowledged that I had had this baby. I mean, to me, it was a baby. It was a child. And
Yes.
so, because it was on the topic pregnancy and there was no baby for anybody to see, they just, they told me that it was December 22nd when I had the ectopic pregnancy, when I had the baby. And I came home and everybody said, you have to, chin up and buck up and not cry and all that because it's Christmas and you've got 3 surviving children and they need you. And so that's what I did. I
Yes,
bucked up until
and you have
several
such
years.
a big heart too. You adopted 2 children from Korea. They were both infants, a boy and a girl, but they were not biological siblings. And then you gave birth to a daughter in 81, and then in 84 is when you had the ectopic pregnancy. So, like all people who have children, because I know a lot of people who have lost a baby and they had other children. You clearly have to think about the other children as well, but that doesn't mean that you're not grieving on the inside. But what I found, Peggy, and it sounds like the same thing that's true for you, people minimize your loss when you didn't physically give birth to the child.
Exactly. It's not a child to them. It's,
Yes.
if you have a miscarriage, ectopic
Yes.
pregnancy, it's, well, it's God's way and what, it's meant to be. Well, that's true. It's not true, but that's how they feel about it. But I didn't feel like that.
Yes.
And one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm starting to read about, is several states are enacting a law that recognizes and produces a death certificate for a child that died as a result of a miscarriage or a stillbirth. Because, in the state of Texas, if the child breathes, then, it gets if the child has a death certificate. If it breathes but dies. And if it's a miscarriage, they don't do that. So I think this is going to go nationally. I think there's an organization trying to do this nationally. So that'll be wonderful.
Yes, because it's like you said, I read one of your articles and you had said that you named your baby. You didn't know the sex of the child, but you gave your baby a name, Noel, that could be for a boy or a girl. Why was it important to give the baby a name?
Because it's real then. I can talk about the baby. And let's face it, as women, when we become pregnant, we already start before you even feel the baby move, you start thinking about, could they be president? Is she going to be a ballerina? I hope he plays soccer.
Yes.
We think of all these things, and then when the baby dies, before it's even born, and we don't get to care for it, it's so important to name it. It is still a baby, and it grew under our heart, and it is still a child.
Yes. Did your husband grieve as much as you did over losing the baby?
No. As a matter of fact, we didn't talk about it. Like I said, my family, my neighbors, everybody just said, chin up, and you can't cry. It's Christmas, and just go on with your life. And so that's what I did. So we really didn't talk about it.
Well, I didn't. I'm learning something new right now. One of our regular viewers, the sweetest girl in America, Julia, said that she had a stillborn. And she said it had a name before she knew that he was a boy, but he had no heartbeat, but he had a name. Julia, honey, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. And Peggy, I'm sorry for your loss too. My goodness. That's like amazing. Well, that's another thing that's so great about the chat room on this show is that people are able to converse with me and with one another during the show, and we just learn so much. So many people have had so many losses, but yet you don't have the slightest idea. You perhaps know about the latest one, but you just don't realize how many other losses people have had. So Julia, honey, I'm happy to learn that about you, but I just didn't know. I'm so sorry about that. So, and Connie's here. Hello, Connie. We're glad to see you. I see people are still signing on to the chat room. We've got a wonderful group tonight. And if you've just tuned in, you're watching Robin Craig Live, and I'm speaking with Peggy Sweeney, and she is located in Kerrville, Texas, down south. So, Peggy, you said that you didn't really grieve for having lost a baby through an ectopic pregnancy because it was just 3 days before Christmas. You've got three little kids, and everyone's telling you, honey, you've just got to be cheerful and smile for the babies. You obviously did that. And then you said years later, you were in a workshop for bereaved parents, and the tears just started flowing. Were you surprised?
It did. I was taking a course about neonatal death. And they started, the program was wonderful. It was 2 days long, and it was towards the end of the second day, and they started talking about ectopic pregnancies. And they were talking about how difficult it is for the mothers because they don't have a baby to hold and be able to say goodbye. And all of a sudden, I just started sobbing. And so, lovingly, people came up to me, and they said, what's wrong? And so I told my story. And it was the first time that I actually got to talk about my story. And that's what's so important, is to be able to acknowledge this life and talk about your story. And that's one of the reasons I do newsletters. And I tell people, they'll say, I don't know what to write about. I said, just tell your story. Because the more stories we hear, we know we're not going crazy. And so that was a beautiful time for me. And that was when I chose the baby's name. They said, we need to have, a little memorial service. And we did. It lasted about 5 minutes. But I chose a name, and we celebrated the baby, and, it was wonderful. It was great.
Did your children, were they big enough to understand that a baby had been lost, your three other children?
Well, sadly, I did the same thing my mother did when my little brother died after a day and a half. He was born, this was back in 1961, and I was 13 at the time, 13 or 14. And my mother came home from the hospital, and again, back then we didn't talk about death. We didn't talk about grief. They were protecting me, and as many parents still do today, we don't want to talk about sad things. And so I saw my mother crying, but we never talked about how she felt, how I felt. We didn't talk about the baby. We didn't have any type of funeral for him. You didn't do that back then. So we've come a long way, but we still have a little ways to go yet.
Yes, and I know when we talked on the phone, you were saying that people deal with the loss more easily if they come from a family that was more communicative, where you could talk about anything. But a lot of families really don't talk.
No, they don't. And it's just like the men. Our society teaches men when they're little boys that big boys don't cry.
Yes.
So that's why men are so, you'll see them, and you know that they have to be hurting. You know that they feel the same feelings and have the same emotions we have.
Yes.
But they're not allowed to talk about it. They're not allowed to show any emotion, and it's sad.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine if we polled your audience that it may have been that, but you'll find that the men that are on this group tonight are kind of talkative people, and they're not afraid to talk about their feelings. Maybe they even cry a little bit. I would imagine that most of the women don't have any problems crying, but
Yes.
But men do. They just can't. They're not allowed to share feelings and emotions.
I know it's been, 25, 26, some odd years later since you lost the baby. Do you do anything to remember, or do you mainly remember on the day that it happened every year? How has it changed for you over the years?
Well, what it's taught me in my profession is I have a special place in my heart for bereaved parents and for firefighters and other emergency responders. But what the loss of my baby has done for me is I am able to help people that are going through the same thing. I'm able to, again, share my story.
Yes.
This is how I felt. You know,
Yes.
I was angry. I was hurt. I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was going crazy because I had all these feelings and emotions, and after all, it wasn't a real baby. But to me, in my heart, it was a real baby. So that's how it's impacted my life.
Yes. Yeah, and it's so important for us to be able to talk about this because seriously, people want to discount a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy, thinking unless the baby was physically born, that their grief really shouldn't be so great. But that's not true.
Right, exactly.
Well, what do you recommend people do who have lost a child in their effort to heal?
There's several things. First of all, they need to, I recommend that they try to join a support group. I know that Compassionate Friends is an international organization, and they are for bereaved parents and bereaved siblings and their families.
Yes.
I have a local group here called Halo of Love, which is for bereaved parents. There is a wealth of books nowadays about dealing with all different types of child death, whether it's an ectopic pregnancy or a stillbirth or a suicide, a homicide. And we grieve no matter how old the child was or the cause of the death. There's also many, many websites that feature help for bereaved parents. And all of that information I continually add to the website that you posted there. I've got, books, I've got links, I've got, all types of things on there to help not only bereaved parents but other people as well.
Okay. All right. So you think that journaling is really important. We hear a lot about that. Tell everybody why you think journaling is so important.
Journaling affords you the opportunity when and you don't, when I talk about journaling, I don't mean you have to sit there and write an epistle. You can have a bad day and just write, I had a bad day today. And if you want to write, if you want to spend an hour writing, you can do that. What it allows you to do is over the course of time, and that could be 2 weeks or 2 months or however long, when you think you're not getting better and you'll never get over it, you'll just start incorporating your grief into your life.
Yes.
The journal allows you to go back and look that, yes, in the beginning, I didn't get anything done around the house, but boy, I'm finding out that I'm doing more and more around the house. I vacuumed the other day. I'm making progress.
Yes, I think that's a very valid point because you're right. You forget if you have a good day or if you've had a happy moment, everything just seems terrible. But if you make notes of those incidents, when you look back, you really can start to say, wow, I'm definitely improving. And we certainly need to know that we're getting better when we're in that terrible, horrible place of grief where it feels like we're never going to be happy again.
Yes.
What do you think about taking pharmaceuticals when you're grieving?
Medications, and we're talking prescription medications, they're good. And I'm not discounting any medications that people have to be on to stay healthy. Unfortunately, when some of us experience a very traumatic loss, and it can be an ectopic pregnancy. It doesn't have to be a major, major, major traumatic event. But we go to the doctor because we're having trouble sleeping, maybe we're having nightmares, whatever the situation is, and the doctor tries to help us by giving us some type of antidepressant or a sleeping pill, and I'm not discounting them. I'm not saying that they're wrong.
Yes.
But what can happen sometimes is people become addicted to them. And now, not only because it numbs the pain, it makes you feel good. It helps you sleep so you don't feel this emotional pain.
Yes.
But what happens is you can become addicted. And now not only are you suffering with your grief pain, now you have an addiction problem that you have to deal with. So I strongly recommend to people to just keep in mind what can happen and not to abuse the medications.
Yes, and and you're right about that. The reason why you take the medication is so that you don't feel the intense pain, but sometimes you go overboard with it or you start adding things to it where you're so numb, one day you wake up and you realize you've missed your whole grief process and you've got to still go through that even if it's years down the road.
That's right, exactly. You're right
Yes.
on.
Well, when do you say that people get over grieving? That's something people who are not grieving always say, when are you going to get through grieving? When are you going to be done with this?
You're never over it. You're never over it. And that's probably one of the top questions that I'm always asked is, how long is it going to take me before I start feeling better and I get over it? And first of all, it's going to take you as long as it's going to take you. There is no time limit. There are no rules when you're grieving. I'm not going to tell you that on the anniversary of the death you're going to feel fine, because everybody grieves differently. And so it's going to be a process. It's not
Yes.
going to happen today and then in 5 days it's over. You're going to
Yes.
have all kinds of feelings and emotions. And it's some days like a roller coaster ride in the dark
Yes.
with
Yes.
no safety net. And
Yes.
you're terrified. But
Yes. Sandy is saying, she says, I don't believe that people ever get finished with grief, that we get on with life, but we never forget. And Doug agrees. He says, you never get over it, but you at least try to get through it. So, and there's Nyla. Hello, sweetie. We're glad you made it. Everybody, we've got so many people talking in the chat room. It's really beautiful. And I'm talking with Peggy Sweeney, a bereavement educator who lost a child and has had an amazing career giving back and helping others. Now, we were talking earlier, Peggy, about how once you've had a loss, you have to redesign your life because obviously your old life is gone and you've got a hole there that you've got to fill. But what can people do to redesign their life in addition to journaling?
well, what I often compare it to is, for example, I have a puzzle, and the puzzle is your life, and it's got a lot of pieces. And so a loved one dies, and you come to me and you say, now what do I do? And putting your life more or less back together after you've experienced this death of a loved one is like taking that puzzle and throwing it up in the air. And while the pieces are coming down, I grab one of the pieces and put it in my pocket. And you start working on your puzzle, and you've got it all done, but you say there's a piece missing.
Yes.
That's the person that died, or the
Yes.
event that happened. Grief isn't just when someone dies. There's divorce. There's a lot of things that take place. And so what you have to learn to do is redesign your life to accommodate that little space in your puzzle life that isn't there. And it's going to take you a while. You're good, because we don't just mourn the person that died. It's not just the death of the loved one. It's all the other things that were associated with that person. Their smile, their laugh. They were our confidant. For spouses, it was that bony leg that you may have rubbed every night before you went to bed. Or if you're a young widow or widower, and I know you hate that, I call them bereaved spouses, that it's you have children, young children that now you're raising by yourself. It's all the things that this person was to you that you're grieving. And so it becomes monumental. But what the eventual goal of grieving, it's a journey. And the journey is going to make you more warm, loving, and caring as you continue your journey. Someday you will end that journey, but you will never get over the loss completely.
Yes.
It's just like having surgery. You're over the surgery, you're back on your feet, everything's fine, and 10 years later you can still look at the scar and say, I remember the surgery. Well, that's what grief is. That's what your grief journey is. At the end of the journey, you're going to have a scar, but you'll never get over it.
It's funny that you say that because I always talk about when women have a C-section, they have a scar there, and their kids can be in college, and you'll still hear them saying, that scar is still there. It still bothers me when I wear like knit fabric. You can see it and that sort of thing.
Right.
And people don't have a problem with that. But when you have a scar on the inside from grieving, people just have a problem with that. They feel like it should be gone.
Right. Yes,
It's
exactly. And it's not going to be gone. And usually the people that want you to get over it are people that, number one, have never been through it, or
yes.
number two, they may have been through it, but the way that they cope with it is by ignoring it, by stuffing it inside of them. And so
Yes.
they don't want to deal with your tears.
Yes.
You have to,
And I know
tell your
too.
story 1,000 times before it really, really, really becomes real. People
Yes,
don't want to listen
and
to that
people
story that
say
many times.
such terribly cruel things like, we're sick of hearing about this, and I mean, they just say such terrible things. And how would you address people that say mean comments like, how long are you going to ride this wave, or you really just need to move on and get over it? What do you say when you hear someone say that?
Well, I think it depends. I leave it up to the person who's grieving, and I say, you have several options. If it's somebody that you really don't know, it's just a casual acquaintance, you can just look at them and just nod your head and go, uh-huh. But if it's somebody, a family member or a close friend, and it really is starting to hurt you that they don't get it,
Yes.
then what you may have to do is just make a pot of coffee and sit down at the table and say, this is how it is. You're not walking in my shoes. I don't want you to ever feel what I'm feeling, but this is what I'm feeling. These are the emotions and the feelings that I have, and I don't have to get over it right now. It's going to take me time.
And it's so sad because so often people are just not receptive to that. They just don't want to hear it. They just think you've got a problem, or that you're dragging it out, or you're trying to get sympathy, or you're trying to get out of work, or they turn it into something that it's not, which is just so wrong.
That's right. Exactly. And another thing, for bereaved parents, a lot of times people will say, well, how many children do you have? And again, if it's somebody that you just see in Walmart and you'll never see him again, you can say whatever you want. But for some people, it's very important that they say, I have 3 children. 2 of them are here with me on earth, and the other child, and always say what the child's name is, because it's very, very important for a bereaved parent, is tell them that, little Johnny is in heaven. But I have 3 children. 2 are here and 1 is in heaven. And don't be ashamed or afraid or whatever. And sometimes it'll really knock the socks off of the people that you tell. It's like, I'm sorry. Well, it's important. You need to say what you need to say.
Yes, because I think that's another thing. When we're grieving, we don't have the gusto, we don't have the fight that we do when we're not grieving. So even though you oftentimes feel that people are saying things that are wrong, you don't really have the energy or the desire to even address it. But I think it is better if you can address it and tell people, walk a mile in my shoes, and then see what you have to say. But it's easier
Exactly.
said than done.
Yes, exactly. And while we're speaking of, the energy and stuff, one of the other things that I encourage people is, I know that it is hard to deal with grief. Grief is very exhausting. And so some of the things that I encourage people is, you don't have to eat 3 meals a day. If you can eat 5 or 6 tiny meals, whatever, but eat healthy. Eat fruit and vegetables, not the potato chips and that type of thing. Also, I know that it's difficult for some people to sleep. And a lot of people don't have trouble sleeping. They have trouble staying awake. But try and relax every day. And try to spend at least 15 minutes a day just quiet. And if you want to play quiet music, that's fine. If you want to go for a walk, that's fine. But you have to take care of you,
Yes.
physically, emotionally, and mentally. So
Yes.
be good to yourself when you're grieving.
Yes, and we don't think about ourselves so much. We just, I've heard widows say, I didn't even worry about getting my hair cut, and there's no one looking at me, who cares? Other people said, I didn't even notice that I needed to get a haircut. So it's hard to do that. But if you can focus on yourself a little bit, I think that you feel better just by paying some attention to you.
Right.
Well, Peggy, I want to segue a little bit over to your career as being a member of a volunteer fire department. That's unusual for a woman, and I love that. I think that's so great. What's concerning to me, though, is how you talk about the increase in suicide among firefighters and other emergency first responders.
Well, for many, many years, and even today, we look at firefighters and police officers and correctional officers and 911 dispatchers, and this is their job, and what they do doesn't affect them. But now more and more deaths are taking place within the fire service, and it's been going on in the police department, is suicide. And what they're finding now is because there's so much stress, and it's what these men and women feel and see and taste and smell and have to do every day when they are on trauma scenes or rescuing children from a burning building, whatever it is, it's taking a toll on them. And I think it's always taken a toll on them. It's just that now it's coming out into the open that there are suicides happening. I can't give you statistics on it because it's still kind of a hush-hush thing. But, 21 years ago when I did in 2000 when I did a research paper, I started finding that there was a problem within this community. And now several of us, I'm sure there's a lot more, it's the several that I know right now, we're fighting to get funding so that programs on suicide prevention and depression and addiction can be given out to these departments, that we can train these men and women how to better take care of themselves. So this is one of, like I said, one of my other passions.
I know, and it sounds like the firefighters are a lot like some of the military guys. I had a friend that was in the Army, and he said that when things would happen, they would hear, just suck it up and drive on. And you said that the fire chiefs are doing a lot of that, like it's just part of the job, just suck it up and just do your job.
Exactly. A lot of your old timers are doing that. And, it's just coming out now how much PTSD and stress took place in World War II. And you're right, Robin, especially the Vietnam veterans, they have their own group that works with other veterans in dealing with stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. And thank God it's finally coming out in the open. This is a real problem, and it's tragic. And a lot of a lot of the military, a lot of your emergency response people, they're addicted to alcohol, they're addicted to drugs, there's violence. We need to do something to help them.
Yes. And, I think it's so crazy. I mean, yes, we look up to firefighters and police officers and EMTs. I mean, they save lives every day. So we look up to them. But we have a tendency to put them on this pedestal as being untouchable and they're just like superheroes. But in reality, they're human just like the rest of us, and they hurt and feel the pain from their job on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And what a lot of people, I know when I mentioned this the other day to you, most people in this country aren't aware of the fact that over 80% of the firefighters are volunteers. They don't get paid, or if they get paid, like maybe $5 a call. And what the term says, they're volunteers. So they leave a full-time paying job to respond to a fire scene or an emergency scene. And if they're injured on the job as a firefighter, they don't get any compensation. They don't have any insurance for most of the departments. And so what happens? They can't go back to work. So now this wasn't a work-related injury, so now they have no funding coming in. A lot of fire departments have to buy their own fire gear because they don't have the money. So it's really important to support your firefighters and your EMS, especially those that are volunteers.
And what can everybody do to help who wants to support these groups?
One of the best things you can do is, most of your fire departments that are volunteer or EMS that are volunteer, they have fundraisers every year.
Okay.
Go to the fundraisers. because that's how they get the money to operate their department. Or if you don't know what to do, go and talk to them and say, what can I do to help? And it may sound crazy, but they may say to you, look, we got a printer, but it doesn't have any paper, and we don't want to spend the money right now to get the printer because we need some booths for a couple of new people that have just joined the department. So, maybe buying a box of printer paper. Just go and talk to your fire department and see, what you can do to help them. Support them in their effort.
Yes, and you were telling me that a lot of the firefighters have to purchase their own gear, and that kind of surprised me. I would think that the gear would be part of the job.
Not if you're a volunteer department and you don't have the money.
Yeah, that's great information. So is it more important to support the volunteer fire department?
It's good to support any department, whether it's police, EMS, dispatchers, firefighters. But from a financial standpoint, if you've got a volunteer department in your area and they're the ones that come out and would save your home or your family member, then by all means, financial help is always welcome.
Okay. And is there anything besides just supporting firemen? Is there anything that we can do or say directly to this great group of people to make it better?
Thank you. That's the best thing you can say is thank you for risking your life to protect our community.
Yes.
And most firefighters and EMS, across the board people, they're very thankful when you do that. That means a lot to them. It's often like when I worked, I loved my job. I loved being a mortician and doing things to help families. And then I got a lot of reward from that. Then I got a paycheck on top of it. So it was like, knowing that I did a good job and somebody recognizes that means an awful lot.
Yes, and really, we all need verbal recognition. It's just like I always tell people, when someone dies, you should say something to people on the holidays, or if you're a widow or widower, to mention Valentine's Day and all of those special days when we feel the loss so intensely, to just have somebody say, I'm thinking about you today, and I know that you're missing your loved one. It really means so much. So we can all be more verbal, and we can certainly donate to the fire departments, and a lot of them are nonprofits, so it's a tax deduction. It's a win-win all the way around, which is great. I wanted to read something that you had written, Peggy. You said, our society is witnessing an alarming increase in homicides, rapes, domestic violence, child abuse, and highway injuries and deaths. The aftermath of these traumatic events is having a devastating and adverse reaction on everyone involved, particularly the emergency response professionals, the men and women who serve their communities as firefighters, pre-hospital caregivers, and public safety officers. Their daily experiences with life-threatening and highly stressful events are affecting them physically, mentally, and emotionally. Furthermore, divorce, substance abuse, and heart attack rates in these professions are among the highest in the nation. That is just so sad to hear.
It's the stress and trauma that they deal with every day.
Yes.
It's fighting a fire. You've got 40 pounds of gear on you in addition to what your weight is, and you're lugging all this 40 pounds around, plus a hose and climbing stairs, and they go through a lot of physical activity.
Yes.
And so the stress and the strain of seeing and like I said, feeling and smelling everything that they do, it takes its toll.
Yes, it's just the saddest thing in the world, and we could never make it without them. This is yet one more group that really needs to be supported a lot more. And there are a lot of groups, and that's one thing that makes me really happy in doing the show, is to bring attention to additional groups of people who are so often not really recognized. And like you were telling me over the phone, that when a firefighter dies a normal death or during the line of duty, that there's a big parade and it's a big to-do, but yet if they die by suicide, it's really hush-hush. That's awfully difficult for the families left behind.
Absolutely. And also also for the department, because they work with every fire department, every police department, the people that work there, it's another family. It becomes your family, and you have that camaraderie. And so if one of your comrades die, it's horrible. And if it's by suicide and everybody is pointing the finger or turning their back, it's horrible. It's really terrible. And that's one of the things. I do a program called Grieving Behind the Badge, and it's for training firefighters and EMS across the board people, to deal with stress and grief and that type of thing. But I also do programs for families that have had a line of duty death or non-duty related death, as well as the department.
Yes.
So this is one of the things that I'm getting very into, is wanting to help the departments that have experienced the suicide.
Yes. And is there any help for the families?
Now, if it's a line of duty death, there's all types of help that they get. They get it through the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Okay, and every year they have a memorial program. But if it's a suicide death, no, there's unless he's got insurance and it qualifies, they probably won't get anything. I haven't heard of any, big to do. The national organizations don't do anything for suicide, just if they die in the line of duty.
Well, it's so important to just talk about these things and to raise awareness and to have people consider what this special group of people goes through. I don't know, other than when we've talked about it, if I have technically just sat around and considered how many firefighters become disabled, whether it's from injuries or whatever, and how depressing that is for someone that's been right out there in the front line and saving lives, which is clearly a huge adrenaline rush, and then all of a sudden you're incapable of doing that job. It's got to be so difficult.
It is. It is very difficult, and that, as a matter of fact, I wrote an article about that even though they're disabled, they've had all this training. They can help train at the department. Heck, they can even they can just go and hang around the department and make coffee, or they can go and talk about fire prevention at your schools. But if they become disabled, then they're disabled, and they no longer can work at the fire department.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that we are able to bring some attention to it, and I hope that we'll all have a chance to donate and to just offer as much support as we can, because I've had a house burned down before, and it was really traumatic, and you look around and you see ashes. I remember thinking, I don't recognize anything other than the bathtub and the hot water heater. It's like you can't even really remember what was even in a house, and it's just really tragic.
It is. It is tragic. And if you've lost all those special possessions, that are irreplaceable, it is very traumatic for the family. So that's why, the firefighters really try to make an effort to salvage whatever they can, especially very personal items, so that the family has something to hang on to.
Yes. Well, do you think that age has any bearing on the grief process? If you're older, do you grieve easier or less than someone who's younger, maybe?
No, I think it depends on the person themselves. We touched on, how you were raised, personal experiences. If you're a good grief coper, if growing up you had some friends die and you were able to deal with their grief and stuff, you may have it a little easier. But even when someone dies, say, for example, they've been under hospice care for a couple of months, or someone that died suddenly, and you compare the two, having someone that's in hospice allows you to spend time with that person, but it doesn't mean you're not going to grieve. So I don't think there's no, it's not women grieve easier than men, it's not age, it's none of that. I think it's just everybody is different. And you can, even in the same family, when my father died, my brother and sister and mother and I all grieved differently.
Yes.
Some of us cried and some of us didn't. Some of us wanted to go to the cemetery, others didn't. So there's not, like I said, there's no right or wrong way.
And the message is anything goes. If it makes you feel better, then it's perfectly fine to do whatever you need to do to feel better.
Within surgeries, and we talked about that when we talked about the alcohol and the, the medications.
Yes.
That, other than that, you're right. It whatever works for you. If having a friend over every night, or having someone walk into the house with you because you're afraid to walk in the house, whatever helps you. If you found a book that you really like, and you have to read it 10 times, that's good.
Yes, I think that is so wonderful, Peggy. I love what you're doing. And I want to verbally give out your website because on the archived show, the Chirons do not show up. Her website is Journeys, Journeys, through, spelled THRU, grief, GRIEF, .wordpress.com, and that's how you can reach Peggy Sweeney if you need her help. She does a lot of wonderful bereavement education programs to help people understand grief and hopefully to prevent suicides. I like what you said, Peggy, because we were talking about an organization that was putting up funding, FEMA was putting up funding so that some studies could be done about the guys that died. And you said, I don't want them to die. It's like, we don't want to do a study about them dying. We want to do a study about how to keep them from dying. And I love that. That's so great.
Yeah. Now that's what, like I said, one of my passions, and that's what I'm working for.
Yes, and I know that you'll be successful with it because there's a huge need for it, and so few people are doing this, it's amazing. So, and Peggy, I want to touch on the fact that you are retired now, but you were a mortician because that's not an occupation you hear people talk about an awful lot, and I think only really special people are able to do that job.
It was just a natural, but I didn't find it until I was in my early 40s and had 3 young children and went off to mortuary school, and it has been a very, very rewarding career to be able to, take care of families, loved ones, from the time that they die until, even at the cemetery, and then now with the bereavement work after everything is over, as they say.
Yes. Yeah, it's so great. You're just so cool to be able to do everything that you do and to give back and be chipper. Someone told me that recently. I spoke at a breakfast meeting for a group, and they said, you're dealing with death and people who are sad and grieving. How can you be so chipper and upbeat? And I said, well, sad things happen, but it doesn't bring you down. You want to be there to help people and to help bring them back up. You don't let it bring you down to the bottom.
That's right, and I'm the same way. I'm very upbeat, and people say, isn't your job morbid? Isn't it sad? And I said, at times it is sad, but I can't be like that. To be the professional that I want to be, I have to be able to take care of the families that need me or people that need me. So, and I am very upbeat because there is so much sadness in the world. When people see me, I usually have a smile on my face. I always have something happy to say because I want to try to help them deal with whatever sadness they may be having.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that I like that you're doing are the seminars. You call them HUGS, which stands for How to Understand Grief Seminars. I think there's like a huge need for that because until you're there, you can't get it. You don't know what it's about.
Yes, and it's also good for the people that come that haven't been through it yet because they don't know what to expect, but it's so nice to have the information beforehand. And people, it's an opportunity for people to ask a lot of questions, about, the first question is always, am I going crazy? I feel like I'm going crazy, and it's, no, you're not going crazy, you're just grieving, and that's how grief is.
Yes, yes, it really and truly is. And we have to learn about it because, whether we like it or not, everybody's going to grieve at some point in their life. And for most of us, you're going to grieve like a ton of times. So the sooner we can understand it, the quicker we can learn what to say, how to react, and most importantly, what not to say, the better off everyone will be.
Yes.
Well, I tell you, Peggy, I appreciate you so much. We're running out of time. Is there something that you would like to say before we close?
I just want to say, first of all, thank you to you for giving me this opportunity to connect with your audience. And if anyone has a question, if you'd like to write an article for one of my newsletters, or you just want to visit, you can reach me through my website, and I'll be happy to connect with you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, honey, so much for being here. Oh, here's a quick question before you go. Connie in the chat room wants to know if you can make a living as a bereavement educator.
Well, I'm sure some people can. I am retired, and I am not getting any income for any of the work that I do. I'm doing a program for a church group, and I don't charge anything because this is what I want to do. And all my newsletters are free. All the time I spend, I don't get paid for it. I'm sure there are some people that do get paid, but I, at the moment, don't. And I'm still nonprofit, so.
Okay, so it's not like a get-rich-quick kind of occupation.
Oh, no, you won't get rich quick either in doing bereavement or the funeral profession.
Okay, all right, sweetie, but I bet you're rewarded in ways that I'm sure you can't even describe.
Oh, that's right. And, money is one thing, and the rewards that I get are a whole lot more to me than money.
Absolutely, honey. Well, I think you're the greatest. I appreciate you so much, and we'll keep in touch, and you have to promise to come back at some point.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, gosh, I tell you, I could talk to her forever. Isn't she such a good talker? She's so articulate and so sharp and so caring and so energetic and just doing wonderful work stemming from her own personal experiences. I love that about her. Well, I tell you guys have been talking up a storm here in the chat room, and I'm loving the dialogue. I think that you guys are so great, and just coming here every Tuesday night means so much to me. I appreciate you all so very much. I also appreciate your donations to keep Rob and Craig Live on the air. This is the 3rd year of production, and a lot of us are working really hard and we're not making anything at all, and we're struggling because of it. So if you would like to see Rob and Craig Live stay on the air, there is no donation, too large or too small. You can simply go to my website, RobinCraigDirect.com, and there is a donations page. You can donate with any credit card on PayPal. It's so easy. Technology makes everything so easy in our world today. And I hope that you'll come back every single Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. if you are out in the California area on the West Coast. And please tell your friends about the show. Bring a friend with you next week. A lot of people can benefit from watching the show, but only if they know about it. So thank you if you let me post my show notices on your Facebook site, and thank you for sharing my notices with your friends. And be sure and come back next week for Kathleen Reel, the certified financial planner who is a widow, who has written a book for widows about finances. I'm sure it will benefit you widowers as well. And the following week, John Ritter, our wonderful actor from Three's Company, his fabulous wife, who's a fabulous actress herself, Amy Yazbek, will be on the show, as well as Dr. Diana Milowitz, to talk about the disease that killed John Ritter. So stick around in the chat room. I love chatting with you guys. We'll talk some more. But have a great evening, okay? But don't go away now. Let's keep it going. Keep the dialogue going. I got to close out some windows here. The screen's not big enough for me, guys. All right, everybody.